Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast presented by Zwift, the first World Tour race of the year, UAE Tour Stage 1, Pancake Flat Sprint Stage, 184 Ks, last 5 Ks, all you really need to watch. The sprinters we have here, Philipsen, Elia Viviani, Damar, Sam Bennett with his new train, Groenewegen, as well as Emil Schleppens, Cavendish with Mercu. It's a real sprinters deluxe, and the GC's a little bit lighter than perhaps last year, although we still have Pogacar, Almeida, Yates, Dumoulin, and Co. and Jan Hirt, of course. But sprint stage, Benji, what did you think Quickstep would try and do, given that they've basically sent Mercu with Cavendish and no one else? Which train did you think would be the one to really take it up early? Was it FDJ or Bike Exchange or who?
Well, there's quite a few options here. Like you say, Mercu is here indeed for Quickstep, but they do have some riders that could be those riders that keep the train at the front, like in Ethan Vernon, for example, that we haven't seen ride for Quickstep yet, but is relatively strong when it comes to on track, and that honestly usually leads to being pretty good in a lead-out train. And next to that, they've once again got Stan van Tricht, the same guy they had in one of the previous races, was it with Cavendish as well, I think, in the Tour of Oman. And next to that, Stijn Stales. These are riders that can ride on the flat quite decently, but can they keep a train on the rails in the end? And that's where I agree with you, where that's a bit of a weakness for that team. I was looking at Bike Exchange as one of the teams that could be a team strong enough to keep their train near the front. They've shown it already that they've got a relatively decent train here with Campbell Stewart, a guy we've seen already on the road this season in the Saudi Tour, if my mind serves me correctly. Caden Grove is usually a sprinter for that team. Now, most likely working out for Dylan Groenewegen, I was expecting, because Dylan is a faster sprinter, quite simple as that. Kellen O'Brien, also part of that lead-out train on paper, and Luka Mesgec. And combining all those riders, you're like, okay, these riders should be able to keep their train towards the front. You mentioned FDJ, and I was not certain about it. I thought that team could keep the march to the front and so forth, but towards the end of last season, this exact train kept falling apart every now and then, and therefore I didn't trust it completely. Was there a train like a Bora, for example, where you expected them to be at the front at a certain point?
Well, yeah. Well, they've brought a mixed team, Bora. They've got 3 guys for lead out: Mullen, Archibald, and Van Poppel, and then Conrad, Hindley, and Vlasov are here for GC. So they don't really have a guy for 3Ks to go, whereas FDJ, as you said, it's the train they've had for a long time. It was successful in Giro 2020, and it's not been able to keep Damar close to the front in a lot of the recent races. There's also Dainese or Case Bowl at Team DSM. Take your pick with there, as well as Olav Koy for Jumbo Visma, but he had Rosen and Van Emden to lead him out, and that's it. So he would struggle.
When it comes to Alpecin, did you expect that train to do? Because you're always highly talking about Jonas Ricard, and he was here for Philipsen, together with the likes of Vermeers and Rob Stannard. Did you expect Stannard to be part of that train, or Zwaragli, for example?
Stannard definitely second last man, I think, is what they want from him. But it's a team of 6 riders. It is mostly all elite out, though. So, but they struggled again. A lot of teams struggled to stay at the front. And I would say Bike Exchange were the strongest. But yeah, cut to the chase. This ended up in a sprint. They were on a 50-kilometer straight the entire time. One of the straightest roads ever. And FDJ, I think, got detached from Damar once again. Like, they had 2 guys front. And we saw this last year. Like, if you look at the overhead, the 2 guys are doing an okay lead out. If Damar was there, Bike Exchange, I would say, were the strongest overall. Ackerman did get brought up fairly well on the right-hand sides, I assume, by Richese. Philipsen had Ricard in front of him. That's all he needed. Cavendish was getting squeezed in the middle of the road. Groenewegen was fighting with maybe Barbier for Elia Viviani's wheel. He went over to Cavendish wheel on the right-hand side. So there's 2 trains, and the whole time, like, where's Bora? As I said, they don't have a 3-kilometer man. I think I saw Mullen drop his chain when someone banged into him. This was a hectic finish, by the way, and it always is. First stage, they've cruised around at zone 1 for 3 hours, and there's all these sprinters here wanting to get a World Tour win. So it's always going to be hectic. And Danny Van Poppel does already one of the best leadouts of the year and may remain that way, bringing Bennett from absolutely nowhere with there were like 25 riders in front of him. They found a gap on the left, brought Bennett up, but Philipsen had kicked early on the right-hand side, closes a bit to the barriers, and is just quicker than Bennett. Bennett, I would say, that's the thing. It looks like Bennett had the better lead out than Philipsen, but you have to account for the energy cost of being brought so far forward through the pack with 500 meters to go. That has to cost something. But the big question, who do you think Dylan Groenewegen, Benji could have won this sprint? And yeah, just talk on the Philipsen move a little bit, because I know you have a view on this, because Philipsen started close to the barriers and then finished on the barriers.
Honestly, it wouldn't have surprised me if Dylan Groenewegen won this sprint if the gap stayed open, because the speed at which he was going towards Philipsen's wheel, obviously in the draft, so you need to keep that in mind, was pretty significant. And he goes over that wheel of Philipsen, there's a gap to go through on the right of Philipsen at that moment, and he tries to pass through, but he's not exactly next to Philipsen yet. While Philipsen goes to the right, it's like their wheels are overlapping already. So that's the point where, on paper, if you go to the right, you're basically endangering Groenewegen because you're closing him to the barriers. And if Groenewegen keeps sprinting, then he's in the barriers. So that's not very likable. Based on the rulings of the deviation rule this year, which were very strict, this is 100% a relegation for Philipsen. Should it be a relegation for Philipsen? What do you think if we do it based on last year?
Well, I mean, last year we complained the entire year that it wasn't strict enough, so I don't want to change my tune. But Philipsen starts his sprint, and there's two rider widths. A solid, safe rider width between him and the barriers. There's also, I believe here, Benji, a gap in the barriers when Philipsen opens up his sprint, which I'm not sure is permitted. So maybe something for the Riders' Union to look into there. And so when Groenewegen launches, it's a small gap, but it's plenty big for Groenewegen to get through. And Philipsen, he just drifts right. And because you know why he didn't get relegated, Benji?
It's not Bouhanni.
A, he's not Nacer Bouhanni here. And B, it's slow. It's a gradual move over. They never get done. It's the sharp ones which get done. And Groenewegen was mad afterwards, and I think he would have won. He was coming with the quicker speed.
Yep. I agree.
What do you think? I don't know. The thing is, a lot of people as well, myself included, like, well, there's a wry smile seeing Groenewegen complaining about being closed a little bit, but...
No, I disagree. I disagree with that standpoint, because I try to see every single deviation in a bubble of its own making, because otherwise you are like, if you see Bouhanni deviate and you judge him based on he's done deviations in the past, obviously he's gonna get relegated, but then someone else can do exactly the same the day after with a clean record, and people are gonna be like, but he doesn't do it, let's not relegate. That's not okay, because then you're basically keeping a clean record while he had a deviation, and in the future you once again say for the same rider, well, they have a clean record in the past, but no, they deviated but just didn't get punished for it,
And also, just because Groenewegen, one of the worst moves ever against Jakobsen, that doesn't mean that people should be allowed to do that in future sprints or to him. But I did have a wry smile with him complaining about it, but still, he had to back out. Like, he put his front wheel in there, and it got very, very tight. And Benji Philipsen nearly crashes in the last 15 meters. He goes so close to the barriers. So... Anyway, enough on the relegation. Benji and I think, speaking for both of us, we think it should have been a relegation. If Richese won the other day then this certainly is. But Bennett, Benji, what do you think of the Bora lead out and Bennett? Is Bennett just getting his legs under him? Was it too much effort to move up late? Because I got to say, Philipsen absolutely toasted him in this final 10 seconds.
So basically, how I see the sprint in general is that we need to keep in mind that for every single rider that is riding their first race of the season, that it can be a bit rusty. And Bennett included, Philipsen perhaps included as well. Who knows, at the Tour de France, he might be sprinting faster than he is now. But looking at how the sprint started or was led up to, with 7K to go, we see them sitting at the back of the peloton, talking to each other like nothing's about to happen in 10 kilometers. And we see Archbold pointing at another rider, kind of looking like he was explaining what they were going to do to his teammate in the latter part of this race. And Archbold shows that with his hand, like, oh, we're going to go by the side of the peloton. It straight up looked like that. I'm betting you 95% sure that Archbold was saying exactly that to his teammate. And he was showing that either on the right side or the left side. I can't really say what he was saying to his teammate. And eventually, Archbold was the one that tried to move up on the left, but he got blocked in because we saw that Bike Exchange was taking the entire peloton to the left side. So that didn't really work out. And I think it's a bloody miracle that Bora got through. So if they do this again in the future, not 50% of the time, this is not going to work. Like,
You're right.
they were too far, too late. Quickstep moves up late, yeah, but at least they're in a competitive position with 5K to go, because this was a bit very risky to make that move. But yeah, I think Van Poppel also found a gap in a way that he was kind of lucky with the gap that opened up, because other teams were trying to move from the left side to the right side, and therefore a dangerous situation to move through. But he found the gap right in time and moved forward. So he was able to do it. And we'll have to see in the coming sprints if he can repeat that and bring consistency to the lead out for Bennett. Because if you do it once, this can be a great lead out, but doesn't mean you'll be able to do it every single time. So I need to see consistency there in the coming days to know whether Van Poppel is indeed able to adapt to the situation in sprints like we are knowing Merku to be able to do. And then we see that sprint then, like you say, Philipsen launched, I think, 1.5 to 2 seconds earlier than Bennett does. I went straight into math and I was like, okay, how many meters earlier does he actually launch? 70k an hour means 20 meters per second. So roughly 30 to 40 meters earlier, Philipsen gets to the front and is in the wind compared to Bennett. And he's able to keep it till the line at roughly a tiny bit faster than Bennett is. So yes, there's definitely a difference there. But I also don't see this as a huge difference. It's like, this could just be the other way around in one of the coming stages. So I can't tell you if Bennett is much slower than last year or anything like that. We'll have to see it in the coming days. I need consistency to say that. When it comes to Quickstep, though, we saw Merku at the front in the last kilometer, and Cavendish was trying to find a good wheel, or was next to Ackermann as well, trying to pass through and find gas, but he indeed got squeezed in the sprint. And I would like to see a sprint where we also see Cavendish competing, because today he really didn't get the opportunity to be honest. But again, positioning is part of sprinting, and it wasn't okay today.
Yeah, I do have a word on Merku and Cav. Before we get into that, as a reminder, next Saturday, our show sponsor, Zwift, are the provider to the UCI of the platform for the UCI Esports World Championships. They're taking place in Zwift's virtual New York world. It's a punchy course, and if you want a taste of it, there's recon rides all week. But if you want something a bit more conversational and social, there's our LRCP Zwift group ride on Tuesday evening, 6 p.m. UK time, 7 p.m. European time. That's in that New York world. And yeah, we'll have a Q&A. Join through the link in the event description down below. There's a Discord as well. So thanks to Zwift for supporting the podcast. Quickstep Benji, Merku, he's looked a little bit rusty. A little bit. And I know early season, but last year at UAE, he was kind of doing it solo with Bennett. And Cav today, I saw a little bit of the Bahrain Cav, which I totally understand. He got to a point where he's like, I can't win. There's guys going crazy, throwing elbows in their bodies for 5th and 6th. And he's like, nah, I'm out. And he was getting squeezed, and I totally understand it. So I saw a bit of that. I still think I still think he can win a stage here, though. But here is that top 10. Philipsen winning ahead of Bennett, Viviani, Groeneweg, and Leipinge for Trek, actually, 5th. De Maar, 6th, caught behind on the right-hand side. Barriers, Canter, 7th, then Kooi, De Vriend, and Ackerman, 10th.
I want to talk about Olaf Kooi for a second. He came up with a very similar speed as sprinters in that sprint, but he was able to get blocked because he seemed like, I don't know, there were like leadouts of other teams dropping back every single time, twice, and they were hindering him, had to stop start multiple times, 2 to 3 times. Just a call out, I do think that if Kooi gets an actual run in for a sprint and doesn't get blocked by leadouts left and right, I think he might be able to get a podium in a UAE Tour sprint right here based on the speed I saw today. But I do want to ask you, do you think that's something you can learn as a rider? For example, is that due to not having the right wheel or not having the experience to picking the right wheel that he's left up with riders that are leadouts dropping to the back and so forth that are blocking him all the time?
Well, yeah, everyone knows the wheel they want to be on. Philipsen was a good wheel to be on. People were trying to get onto Viviani's wheel. And if you're not on those two, and then there's Groeneweg and De Maar fighting for them, they're huge guys. Leipinge is coming in. There's a lot of elbows and fighting for wheels here, and you're right. Like, I think even he struggled with that. But it's compare that to Decker last year, Benji, where Decker was bullying Ewan off wheels. But maybe it's good for Kooi's career. You know, if you get a UE to a podium as a young sprinter on Jumbo, you might then have to lead out someone else at the Giro. So maybe best he doesn't do that. Tomorrow, 176 Ks. We'll do it all again. Al Hudayrat Island to the Abu Dhabi breakwater. This should be a sprint. Today was inland, not too much crosswind action. Should be a sprint again tomorrow. And I think Bora will come up a little bit earlier, Benji. I think their plan is to come up at 1500 with Mullen. I'm pretty sure. What happened today can't be the plan.
Yeah.
And I think they can put Philipsen behind. I think Bike Exchange are coming up a little bit early, actually.
I agree, and I think that indeed that Archbold was trying to move up a bit earlier than when Van Poppel was moving up. If he does find that gap, that's certainly a possibility that they do it differently that time around. But yeah, when it comes to tomorrow, it's once again a bloody flat sprint. I think it's finishing. I'm probably wrong, but I think it's finishing in a place where they finished last year as well, but that's not really a surprise because most of the UAE Tour finishes are the same as last year. But I'm curious if we'll see Cavendish be able to compete as well, if Groenewegen gets a clear line tomorrow to be able to sprint for it, and if we can see a difference between the sprinters then, because right now I don't have a clear feeling on who is actually the fastest sprinter at this race yet.
Exactly. I think it might even be Groenewegen, so we'll see him tomorrow. Ackerman, he's going to be wanting to do better than top 10s, I think, in these sprints. So look for him to try and get at least into the top 3 tomorrow. But that was our UAE Tour recap. We'll be back with Andalusia Algarve this evening and maybe Alps Maritime. It's a quadruple header, but we'd get UAE out of the way. Back tomorrow for the sprint. Thanks, Elizabeth, for supporting the podcast. Ciao.